Good evening and welcome to Responding to COVID-19, Fueling the Economy on TTT, Talk City 91.1 FM and TTT Live online on Facebook. I am Wesley Gibbings. The current period is being described by many commentators as a perfect global economic storm. The onset of the pandemic came even as international energy markets were confronting declining demand, prices, and in some instances, reductions in production. There's every likelihood, according to the experts, that depressed conditions will prevail in the foreseeable future as reduced economic activity accompanies measures to address the spread of the virus. This evening, we are taking a close-up look at our own energy sector through the eyes of three top industry executives. From the National Gas Company, we have Mr. Himalaya, Boodoosingh, Senior Manager, HSSE and Security. From Atlantic Energy, CEO Dr. Mshelbila, and we'll be joined a little later by the Regional President of BP, Ms. Claire Fitzpatrick. Together, we will discuss how these leading companies have been able to maintain high levels of productivity while confronting the vagaries of the current national, regional, and global environment. So let's go now to Mr. Mshelbila. Dr. Mshelbila, how are you, sir?
I am very well, Wesley. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, tell me, this is not my area and it's not an area for the average citizen, but where in the classical business continuity planning model is there anything like this?
Well, the thing is that most businesses develop a business continuity plan and they try and anticipate various scenarios concerning, various different things that could happen. I am not sure that anybody has ever seen a pandemic like this one. As you have heard, it's been publicly stated that this is a once-in-a-100-year event. And so it is quite unique in numerous ways because this is not just a health issue. It's actually a global socio-economic threat and one that's going to have lasting consequences even after the COVID-19 virus has left us, unfortunately. So there isn't a playbook for this. We're pretty much learning as we go.
Now, given the global situation, Atlantic is very much subject to the vagaries of those developments on the global horizon. What are you seeing emerging before you at Atlantic?
So, like you say, this is global. And I think earlier you mentioned a perfect storm. This truly is a perfect storm because not only are we dealing with the virus pandemic, we have particularly affecting our industry also the low oil and gas prices, which are probably their lowest in about 20 years. When you combine that with the virus pandemic causing a crash in the market, it therefore puts the oil and gas industry in a really bad spot where you're hit by low prices, your market has crashed, and your people are threatened by this pandemic. So it's pretty much for many industries, including the oil and gas industry, a matter of survival. And so where we are today is looking at how do we survive through this phase and then prepare ourselves to thrive even beyond the pandemic.
Now, what are the measures that have kicked in at the level of Atlantic to cope with this situation that you've described?
So we've done quite a lot of things. Long before the pandemic came, we actually had in our business continuity plan, we had drawn up what we referred to as a pandemic response plan. And when this came, we basically brushed it up. But before I get into that, when this happened, we sat back and decided to set for ourselves key objectives that were going to govern how we respond to this. And effectively, we developed three key objectives for ourselves. The first is that we will protect the health and well-being of our employees. The second is that we will ensure safe and reliable operations for as long as possible. And the third is that we will care and support our stakeholders, and this includes our service providers, it includes our communities, it includes, the country as a whole. And so these three objectives have governed all that we've done since then. We started out by setting up a task force that we call the COVID-19 task force, which is a multidisciplinary team that meets every single day. It also includes our company doctor on that team. And they work very closely with our business continuity planning team. And together, where we started was to start by drawing up scenarios. How could this play out? We thought about the current situation. We looked at what is the most likely scenario in which this will play out over time. And we also worked out what we thought might be the worst case scenario. Of course, nobody has a crystal ball, and therefore this is all about, trying to look into the future without sometimes all the information that you need. But based on those scenarios, we then worked out 4 escalation levels that we thought things might play out, going all the way to the worst case scenario. And for each of those escalation levels, we developed a plan. In other words, at level 1, this is what we do. At level 2, this is what we do. Level 3, and if we get to level 4, this is also what we do.
So, but where would you be? Where are you along that spectrum?
At the moment, we consider ourselves at level 2, but we are already seeing elements of level 3 emerging, though we haven't fully moved into that level 3 stage yet.
And would level 3 relate to situations in the market or those macro issues, or are there micro issues of functionality that you're dealing with as well?
It's all of the above. So it has to do with what's going on in society itself. To what extent has the pandemic impacted the society? For example, what is the extent of community spread of the virus? How is it impacting our employees? How is it impacting our service providers? Do we still have the full complement of manpower that we need? Are we able to continue with our business as we've always done? What degree of disruption are we having in our supply chain? Can our people move around freely? So there are multiple things that we factor into determining the different levels.
Now,
but once we have...
I'm sorry, you continue, please.
Now, the thing, once the individual triggers come in, then we kick in the specific plans that we have, some of which are already existing, as I said, for level 2.
Has there been an impact on output at all?
So far, there hasn't, thankfully, but we are preparing ourselves for the potential because, as you know, when you say impact, there are a number of things that could happen that are outside of our control. If anything happens to our gas supply, that could impact us. If anything happens to our supply chain or our service providers or the shipping industry globally or the market, all of these things could impact us. But like I said, so far it hasn't, and we're thankful for that.
And the stakeholders that you spoke about, that now that you're coordinating closer collaboration with, what kind of fallouts are they experiencing?
Sorry, if I understand, your question was...
regarding the stakeholders and the support service companies and other stakeholders, what kind of fallout are you seeing them experiencing at this time?
Right. I think the biggest impact that we're seeing so far has been on the market for LNG globally. We've also seen some impact on LNG shipping. And while we have managed so far to find, substitutes and alternates and to still run our business, that's where we're seeing some impact. Once there is community spread, then we expect that it could begin to impact manpower, not only ours, but also those of our service providers. Now, we hope we never get to that, but those are the sorts of potentials that are there. One thing I must say is that the arrangements and the very proactive plan that the Trinidad and Tobago government has put in place has been of immense help. It has made life a lot easier for us. Just the fact that society itself is being mandated and many people are voluntarily actually doing the things that they should do. whether it is quarantine where it should be, or people who are, social distancing, and so on and so forth. All of these things that are happening outside also help us as a business. So, thanks a lot indeed to the measures that the government has put in place so far.
Okay, we are joined at this time by Mr. Boodoosingh. He's joining us on Skype. Mr. Boodoosingh, welcome to the program. Okay.
Hi, good night, Wesley. This is Himas.
Okay, and we have Dr. Mshelbila from Atlantic on the line as well.
Hi, good night, Philip.
Hello, Himas.
Great. Now, before you join the call, Dr. Mshelbila and I were having a conversation about business continuity planning and what has kicked in now in response to the pandemic. What's over at NGC? What has been the situation?
Yeah, I think I listened to Philip's initial opening context, and I think it's pretty much the same across at the NGC. I think what I'll say, first of all, is maybe speak a bit about the national context, right? The planning at NGC isn't done in isolation. It's done with integration at the national level. So there does exist what is called a critical infrastructure facilities protection and response plan. And our plan has been developed in accordance and in sync with the requirements there. That plan actually speaks to various scenarios, be it flooding, earthquakes, man-made disasters, that sort of thing. Within there, global pandemic, as Philip indicated, is one of those scenarios that we do plan for. It's unfortunate that we are responding in this particular way, but this is something that the energy sector have actually drilled for. It's not to the scale, and it's one of those things where you practice and you hope you never actually have to do it. But we do find ourselves in that situation right now. And like Atlantic, the NGC activated our response and continuity mechanisms very early on in the game. Back in January, where we looked at what the requirements for global pandemic would be and looked at how that actually integrates with the rest of the country's plan and started coordinating both at the upstream and the downstream level to ensure continuity of the country's operation.
Now, what would be the top priorities?
I think, Philip, I don't know if he stole my language, but I think safe and reliable actually fits in very well with what our top priorities right now would be. And that includes providing the safety of our workers. Very early in the game, we took the decision to allow our employees, where possible, to work from home. We've made a blanket decision across the board for non-essential personnel. And the way I like to look at it is, guys that aren't wearing coveralls, non-essential in this context, to be able to work from home as well. And that kicked in maybe about a week and a half ago. So we're actually protecting our employees, the vulnerable within our employee body as well. We're asked to work from home prior to that. And right now, where we are in this particular stage of the planning, and our plans have been developed using the World Health Organization guidelines and the different scenarios and escalation scenarios that they would have outlined. Our plans are in sync with that. So the stage that we are at now is just prior to community spread with local spread, and the level of our response is always one step ahead of that. So we are responding as though there is a community spread taking place, and we are ready to move to the other level if that is required.
Now, Dr. Mshelbila, have you been able to move quickly into remote functionality for your key operators?
Yes, we have. Essentially what we've done is, similar to him, those who work on the site, we have reduced the numbers to the bare minimum in order to minimize the impact and potential for spread on site. And then for those who are not site-based, who have to be on the plant, we almost over just a weekend, switched to remote working, something we hadn't done before. But our people were fantastic in being able to just deploy technology, including, opportunities like, bringing your own device and it being enabled to connect into the system so that you can do the basic things from home or remotely from wherever. It also enabled our teams to develop various apps that are assisting our people to be able to connect remotely and to do various things that, we haven't even done previous to this time. So yes, we are working quite effectively remotely.
Now, Mr. Boodoosingh, your customer base, if you could call it that, is different, is a different kind of customer base to what Atlantic would be talking about. You're talking about delivery of product, which would be natural gas, to a wide variety of customers. How have you been able to streamline your functions in such a way as to keep the consumers of your product supplied?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Wesley. So I just want to step back a bit and talk about the way we manage those relationships, even outside of these types of scenarios. So there's several networks where the NGC is connected both at the upstream and at the downstream level. That involves several different touch points. There are touch points for HSE, there are touch points for security, there are touch points for operations, and those actually occur quite well. It's just the routine way of planning our business. Particularly at the HSE level, business continuity conversations occur all the time. We actually support each other both in the upstream and in the downstream, and we're always testing what our programs look like, particularly because we use a lot of common service providers, a lot of common contractors, and we want them to have similar experiences as they move through the organizations, both in the upstream and in the downstream. So those conversations are always sort of taking place. When we saw this particular novel coronavirus issue rear its head early in January, we actually started those conversations. So we've started those conversations with the upstream, all of our upstream suppliers, as well as the downstream, not only at the HSE level, but at the executive level as well. Philip will tell you that he sits with my president on the Point Lisa's Executive Association, and those conversations have been occurring. Similar conversations are occurring at the CEO level on the upstream. So there's actually good coordination taking place outside and within this particular sort of scenario that we're dealing with. We also share quite a lot of each other's plans. We're constantly trading ideas in terms of how we're working, challenges that we're having, and how we're overcoming them together. And we're actually sharing that, which is a good practice across the industry. At the operational level where we are currently, those conversations take place almost daily. We're touching in almost on a daily basis with our upstream suppliers and our users, our customers, particularly the critical users, those public utility type customers that need to stay online to ensure that the nation's response to this pandemic is supported. Take something as simple as power, for instance. The ability for the healthcare system to function properly is built on the assumption that power is there, and power can only be there if we ensure critical supply of natural gas to them. So it's all connected, Wesley.
Yes, but in addition to the supply of power, which is absolutely critical, as you have said, and perhaps you can chime in on the reliability of the supply going forward. You have the petrochemical sector, you have light industry, and so on. They would have certain expectations regarding the level of supply. Are you seeing a situation in which you're able to continue providing a reliable supply?
Yeah, at this point in time, the reliability of the supply from the NGC's network is very high. We haven't had any upsets that is preventing from a gathering, delivery, transportation standpoint, any issues that could result in that. What we've done ahead of this particular most recent restriction or guidelines provided, is we've actually looked at our forward planning and accelerated some of those critical maintenance activities that need to be performed, and actually started doing it a couple of weeks ago. So in the event that we have further restrictions, either because of quarantine issues or availability of our own staff, one of the planning scenarios for us at the NGC is looking at scenarios where we may only have 50% or less than 50% staff availability, and how will we respond in that sort of scenario. So while we had the opportunity, we actually did some of those critical maintenance activities to ensure that going forward we can ensure a sort of high level of reliability as supply to those critical customers that you mentioned, including the petrochemical as well as the light industrial users.
Dr. Mshelbila, Mr. Boodoosingh spoke a lot about the collaboration with the domestic stakeholders. With respect to Atlantic, I presume there will be quite a few non-domestic, external and international stakeholders with which you will be having a lot of conversations. What are those conversations sounding like?
Well, I must start locally, actually. We are fully integrated into the Point Lisa's community, as Himas mentioned earlier, and I think that's important because the local connection is extremely critical in this response. But indeed, we do also have broader connections. So we have been looking at how other LNG facilities might be dealing with sustaining their operations. And that includes how they would deal with, a worst-case scenario, and trying to learn from that. We have been collaborating quite closely with our shareholders and looking at what they are doing, because whether it's NGC on the one hand or it's BP or Shell, these are multinational organizations, businesses across the globe, and are looking at how this is playing out in other countries as well. Countries where this has advanced to a worse state than where we are. And so we're trying to learn from them how these things are being managed over there and what we can learn from it as well. We have been working with our Chinese shareholders as well, and looking at opportunities where they can actually support us, and not only support us, but look at ways in which we together can also support our stakeholders. And so the collaboration is quite extensive, both locally and internationally.
Okay, so this is fueling the economy in the face of COVID-19. With us on the line is Mr. Himalaya Boodoosingh of the National Gas Company and CEO of Atlantic, Dr. Philip Mshelbila. We're going to take a brief break and we'll be right back.
Even though school is closed, your child's SEA preparation does not stop. Let them learn math, language arts, creative writing and comprehension in the comfort and safety of your home. Using the JJ and Friends apps, workbooks and wall charts, all designed using the Ministry of Education's primary school curriculum and SEA 2019 to 2023 framework. Our program covers numbers, measurement, money, geometry, statistics, parts of speech, subject-verb agreement, conjunctions and joining sentences, active and passive voice, classical analysis, sentence analysis, direct and indirect speech, punctuation, spelling and vocabulary. Create the perfect learning environment in the safety of your home today. Plus, get a free Amazon Kindle Fire. Get your child fully prepared for SEA with the JJ and Friends SEA Success Series. Call now 800-READ.
Knowledge is power. For students at home following the closure of school to contain the spread of the novel coronavirus, now you can view TTT and stream live on Facebook at TTT Live Online SEA Time, focusing on mathematics and language. All you have to do is tune in Monday to Fridays for mathematics at 9:15 a.m. and language at 1:15 p.m. SEA Time, Mondays to Fridays on TTT and streaming live on Facebook at TTT Live Online is an initiative of the Ministry of Education in conjunction with TTT Limited.
Speak up.
Speak up.
Speak up.
citizens sharing their good news. During the past 4 years, over 35 community centers were built or refurbished. Residents of Mount Hope, Mount Lambert, La Pastora, Santa Cruz, Chiclan and Bonia Aruca are among those excited at receiving their brand new facility.
My name is Angela Ojo St. Rose.
My name is Kenton Hall.
Selena Richards.
Today is a red letter day and I am very thankful for all who, especially the minister and the community development team.
This is a blessing to the community.
I think it's a great opportunity for the youth. We'll be able to hold our football club, our cricket club and a lot of courses.
Maybe use it for great things and not just let it stand up here and get moss.
So I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you.
New community centers improving the lives of residents. This was a production of the Ministry of Communications, Information Division.
Welcome back to Fueling the Economy in the Face of COVID-19. With us on the line is Mr. Himalaya Boodoosingh of the National Gas Company. And we are now joined by Ms. Claire Fitzpatrick, Regional President of BP. Welcome to the program, Ms. Fitzpatrick.
Thank you very much, Wesley. It's a pleasure to join you.
Very good having you. Before you came on, I was having a conversation with Mr. Boodoosingh of NGC and Dr. Mshelbila, CEO of Atlantic, about business continuity at a time like this. What's happening on the BP end? I know there's a global perspective and there's a national perspective. Perhaps you can give us a feel for both.
Certainly. So I think you started using the phrase, this is a kind of a global storm. And I think that is sort of an appropriate thing because we have both the medical pandemic aspect and we also have a price shock. But if I stick with the medical pandemic, given that impacts people, therefore it's our primary concern, this is an unprecedented situation. And the business community has an important role to play in looking after both people, maintaining critical operations, and our role in supporting communities. So from a global perspective, much like you heard Hima talk about in January, NGC started talking with people on what might this mean. We stood up our global response team in January to start thinking through how we might respond to this on a global basis. Locally, our crisis and health teams have been working through response plans for many weeks, and we formally stood up our crisis response team here on the 14th of March. And we're very clear on our priorities of, number one, around ensuring the safety of our people, and then around what can we do to ensure the safety of our operations with a view to how do we give some security around supply, that's supply overall, but in our hierarchy it's making sure that we're protecting the supply to the island of Trinidad as a priority. So that's sort of what the stages that we have started to go through. Much like the others, I am sure we would all like to say thank you to our frontline employees and service providers as they are on our onshore and offshore sites to ensure that we are keeping the lights on. But at the very difficult time, that means they're away from their families. So I think they need to be commended for their role that they're playing in response that we're doing. And I also think from sort of BP's perspective, I think we'd like to commend and support the government for the prompt and decisive actions that they have taken around seeking to secure the security of the people of Trinidad. So like the others, we are continuing to evolve our plans, very much looking to how do we secure our people and our operations, including what that then means for contractors and ensuring that they too are clear on what is required in terms of changes in protocols to keep not only our people safe, but their own people safe as well.
Now, even before this current crisis, there were issues regarding the market and there were issues regarding production levels. How do you see the short to medium term unfolding when it comes to those issues, given what's happening now with respect to the human resource issues and the global crisis, turbulence that's happening?
Well, I think if we start with from the people perspective, I think we've put in steps in place steps to try and protect people as much as possible in terms of, again, as you've heard from the others, any non-essential staff are not at site. Anyone who can work from home, we have had people working from home since the 16th of March, but we've been putting in place screening protocols, monitoring protocols, isolation protocols, up to and including what we're calling a cocooning strategy, which is developed for some of the business critical operations to ensure that we can continue supply for the essential services such as power, which will hope to manage and mitigate any of the potential escalating scenarios which people are thinking their way through. So we're doing our best to make sure that we keep people as safe as possible. Again, if people are not on site, then we're strongly encouraging that they do listen and adhere to the government's guidelines around staying at home, not being out unnecessarily, the social distancing, but we're also making sure that we're communicating all of that with our contract community. So at the moment, we're seeing no short-term impact to supply. Yes, there are scenarios that we're working through which, if the global market demand decreases and there is a need to have lower production coming out from Atlantic, as Dr. Mshelbila talked about, but we're working very much to ensure that we are cocooning what is needed as a minimum to keep supply to the island. So that's what I mean in terms of how we're tiering our responses. But our primary purpose is obviously looking for the safety of our people, then the security of supply. But we are looking through both lenses. Longer term, what might this mean in terms of market demand? I think it's a fast evolving scenario, and it's one that we need to make sure that we are planning so that we're in a position to respond appropriately.
Dr. Mshelbila, I suppose a lot of this resonates quite clearly with you. Is it the same kind of posture of Atlantic? Which affected in the scenarios?
Yes, it is. I must say I didn't catch everything that Claire said, but the way we've also structured is indeed such that we have looked at risk, right, and approached this on the basis of risk. So starting by recognizing the entire value chain and where there could be challenges and weaknesses in that value chain, we have then tried to put in place the sorts of mitigation that could deal with whatever different scenarios that we would meet. A couple of the things that are actually going to see us through this are a rigorous prioritization of our activities to ensure that we're focusing on the right things during this time. We're also focusing a lot on finding new ways of working and new ways of doing things that are different from the past. And, sometimes they say necessity is the mother of invention, and we've definitely seen our staff just blossom in the area of technology and in finding creative ways of doing things. The other one is just in exercising very robust financial discipline at this time. And these are the things that we think will see us through the challenges that we're facing at the moment, aside from the actual activities that we're implementing on site, such as thermal scanning that we're now doing on our site, applying questionnaires to manage those coming onto the site, and the social distancing as well, even of our operators on site.
Mr. Boodoosingh, the technological response, the remote functionality of the operations of NGC, what do you say about that?
Yeah, I think this has been a really good opportunity. You never really waste a good crisis, is a saying that I've heard a lot in the energy industry. NGC has found really creative ways of getting things done as well, as Philip and Claire mentioned already. I think it's from the technology standpoint, one of the, maybe I'll make 2 points around that. One is just a bit to talk about using technology in the form of redundancy. We do have multiple control rooms that exist at different facilities that are scattered across Trinidad and Tobago. One of the things that we have done is actually created a system where we can operate facilities remotely from one of the other control rooms. So if for any reasons one particular control room isn't accessible, it can actually be operated remotely. And we've tested that outside of these scenarios. Last year, I actually witnessed that being tested during a flood scenario where remote monitoring and operation was conducted. So again, that loop-in increases the level of reliability for us to ensure that safe and reliable delivery to customers. The second one, and I really have to, offer congratulations to my own team at the NGC, because within a couple of days, they were able to quickly turn around a solution that allows persons to hot desk in from a remote location. One of the challenges we had at the NGC was how do we get folks who work with a desktop machine that's difficult to take home in such a short scenario. The guys were actually able to deploy a solution that allows them to remote in from their own personal machines at home, and tested that within a couple of days, and it worked beautifully. So we're actually seeing the benefits of that right now.
Yeah, Mr. Boodoosingh, we covered this a bit with Ms. Fitzpatrick and Dr. Mshelbila regarding the scenarios. In terms of the scenarios that are being envisaged by NGC, what is the thinking short, medium, and long term?
Yeah, I think from a scenario planning standpoint, we actually started looking at this back in January, looking at various stages of escalation and what would our response be to those sort of challenges that we're faced with. I think Trinidad has been fortunate in some regard. In that maybe we did have a crystal ball. We just needed to look at what's happening around the world where this actually started and started spreading, and looked at the challenges that those countries and those communities face. And, we started asking ourselves the question, how will we respond when this gets here? It's not a matter of if it got here, it's when it got here. So we started looking at various scenario levels. We operated for, a couple of weeks with no cases in Trinidad. The next scenario we looked at was when the first case came to Trinidad and what we do differently, and we actually kicked in those plans. We looked at local spread, which is slightly different from the community spread. So we looked at local spread level clusters. Then we moved to community spread, and our actual last stage of planning, which we are getting ready and geared up for now, is in the event that there are further restrictions in the movement of personnel through a state of emergency type of scenario, how will we respond? We do see and hope that the measures that the country and the authorities have taken thus far should prevent us from getting to that scenario. But in the event that we do get to that stage, we want to be ready to actually respond. One of the things that we're starting to do right now, and maybe even thinking about implementing prior to that, is actually looking at putting our operators, our critical operators, in quarantine, so that they're actually, we see actually changing shift as a big threat to us, where there's the potential to import a case into the control room. We do want to keep the control rooms as pristine as possible. So we're looking at getting ready to implement that level of response even before, further restrictions come in place. So we've looked at sort of 5 levels of response, and we are, like I said earlier, we're trying to stay 1 or 2 levels ahead of that in terms of our readiness.
Ms. Fitzpatrick, as a global business, how are the other operations elsewhere in the world being seen as providers of best practice models and in turn sharing of best practices throughout the world in the BP chain?
Within sort of BP globally, then there is daily communications between all of our sites, no matter which bit of the business people are in, so that we are learning from each other and sharing best practice. So that's a routine part of how we operate. And we're also then sharing where people are learning things that are more successful than others, and also just learning where techniques have been more successful than others. So you mentioned, you heard Hima there talk about looking around how do they quarantine key staff to try and make sure that they can have the key control room staff be able to continue to work without contracting the virus. That is something that we have already implemented around what we refer to as the cocooning strategy for our business critical operations. And that was something which not only here in BP in Trinidad, that's something that we're actually looking at doing where possible in many locations. Now, it's not necessarily something that is possible for every location. It very much depends on their circumstances, but it's something that all locations look at in terms of how do you, again, as Hema said, the more you can reduce crew handovers, then the fewer opportunities there are to actually have transfer. That's also something we're looking at even for when we are taking crews off-site. We're making sure that each of the sites crew change on a different day so that we also isolate who's actually physically moving between sites and shore to, again, try and introduce another layer of protection to minimize the risk of spread.
Now, Dr. Mshelbila, I suppose a lot of that is very familiar to you, but the variety of service providers and other stakeholders may or may not be wider in scope than when we speak about BP. So the safety issues, the health and safety issues might have broader application in the case of Atlantic. Is that so?
Well, I think there are lots of similarities from a health and safety perspective right across the industry. However, there are one or two instances, for example, where we have done certain things just to try and mitigate some risk. So take, for example, when the LNG ships come, jetty side for loading, typically we would have a number of our employees boarding the vessels in order to interact with the captain and his crew, get some forms signed and so on. Since this pandemic, we have been able to get an intrinsically safe tablet that we actually rig up to the vessel. It has all of the forms on it. The captain and his team are able to have a call via Teams with our control room, and we don't have to send our staff up there. So talk about social distancing being mitigated by technology. That's an example. If you look at, the way I see this pandemic is when it is over, I think very few of our companies will be left the same. One of the things we've started doing is electronic signatures, as an example. That is something that we've been trying to do in order to get to a paperless system. And we've kind of struggled with it. And now we're in a situation where it is mandated. We just have to do it. There isn't a choice. So there are a number of things that we're doing which have an impact on health, safety, as well as the environment, talking about a paperless system, which have been triggered off or accelerated by the pandemic coming upon us.
Okay, Mr. Boodoosingh, you're going to have the last word, just a few seconds, in terms of the legacy issues and the human safety issues.
I think from a human factors perspective, I think we do need to recognize that this is a new territory for all of us. I think Philip mentioned 1 in 100 years type pandemic in his opening context. And I think a lot of our critical staff that is working sort of behind the scenes, silent running, making sure that we can enjoy the things that we're enjoying right now. There's a lot of stress on these guys, and I want to recognize that we have been working with our providers to ensure that personnel recognize the need to stay fit, not just physically but mentally during this very stressful period.
Okay.
And I just want to recognize the fact that there are a lot of workers, energy heroes that are silently running all of these organizations that's making all of this happen, and
okay,
I want to thank them for their service.
We have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we're out of time. And as we come to the end of fueling the economy in the face of COVID-19, I wish to thank again Mr. Himalaya Boodoosingh of NGC, Dr. Philip Mshelbila, CEO of Atlantic, and the Regional President of BP, Ms. Claire Fitzpatrick. I'm Wesley Gibbings saying thank you for staying with us. Remember to stay tuned. Coming up next, a rebroadcast of the Prime Minister's National Day of Prayer. Have a good night. Stay home. Stay safe. Save lives.